This will be our discussion of the information from week 13. In this discussion, I'll be addressing the final readings for the course, the final assignment for the course called the Face of the Field assignment, the modes that you'll be using to develop the Face of the Field assignment, and last, the posted examples that you'll find on Blackboard. Final readings for the course will be two of the chapters from the Bazerman textbook that we've been using all semester long already. Those chapters are chapters 10 and 11. You can see from the titles of the chapters that there is a good reason to look at them together. One chapter looks at the overall process of writing a research paper, and the other chapter is looking at reference and documentation, something that is absolutely necessary in any effective academic research. Know these things then as you go into reading the chapters. Chapter 10 is dated, but worthwhile for reflecting on the necessary stages of the research process. You'll find in the announcement that has more detailed information about what's due that there are only certain aspects of Chapter 10 that I'm asking you to look at. This is due to the fact that the majority of the chapter has to do with research methods that are simply outdated now. Maybe 20 years ago, they were the sorts of methods that you would use, but luckily for us and academic researchers everywhere, using things like electronic databases has gotten quite a lot easier. Chapter 11 is an insightful discussion of sources, how to find them, how to vet them, in other words, make sure that they're of good quality, and finally, how to use those sources productively in your writing. The Face of the Field assignment asks you to write a detailed personal and professional profile of the person who best personifies the field that you are studying. You will be using the profile as a way to discuss the current state of the profile itself. And what that means is that we will bring the field to life through the person that you're writing about. Not every reader cares about subject matter that you do, but generally speaking, it is a whole lot easier to make sure that our readers relate to the people that we discuss. So that's why we'll be developing this essay this way. A few more notes on research and sourcing. Because of the current nature of the topic that you'll be choosing, your essay will rely primarily upon electronic web based sources. Because we're looking at someone who is currently active in your field, the chances are good that there might not have been enough time for the more formalized publishing process to take place. However, it could have. It's entirely possible that someone has written a book or two on the person that you've chosen. So feel free to visit the library itself for help. Obviously, that's where access to material items like books would be. That's also where you'll have good access to research librarians who can help you during the process. Let me say this: 10 minutes spent with a research librarian face to face is worth 30 or maybe even 45 minutes spent interacting with a research librarian online. That face to face interaction, if you can make it happen, will help your entire research process and it will help everything to go more quickly. Now, relevant sources really can only be as old as your profile figure is. Again, we're looking at someone who is current here. Source evaluation will be a must for this assignment because we can't rely upon things that we find through the library or the library database to give us our guarantee of good quality. There is a very useful test for the sort of source evaluation we need to do here. It's a thing that is sometimes called the Parka test or other times called the CRAP test. And you can see from those names that they're just different organizations of the same letters. I like to think of it in terms of the CRAP test, in which you're asking yourself and the source you found, is it good or is it crap? I have a direct link in the presentation to what is a very good discussion of the way that this test works and the rationale for the things that you'll be looking for with that test. So please give it a look. With this assignment, because it's a standard, more conventional research paper, documentation and citation are still absolutely necessary. Now, a word about drawing attention in your writing to the sources that you're consulting, according to or similar phrases will always be much more useful than simply relying upon parenthetical citations to do the same job. The parenthetical citations would still appear at the end of a sentence that begins with an according to phrase, but the key is that we're not just relying upon those. We've used the verbal citation that would come after according to help to draw the reader's attention to the source that we're referring to. Regardless, parenthetical citations themselves must have the author's name, the year of publication, and if possible, a page number in APA. Also in APA, but in MLA and really any other citation style you use, you have to make sure that there is an easy, direct way for the reader to draw a connection between the in text citation and the end citation. One good rule to follow is parenthetical citations must begin with the same first word as the end citation begins with. This makes it as easy as possible for our reader to link the two. On the other hand, if that connection isn't made, in effect, the chain of reference breaks down, and the research paper actually loses a really valuable way of appealing to the reader. Speaking of the appeal to the reader, in a research paper, or frankly, any paper at all, your reader should never wonder where any given discussion is coming from. Sourcing needs to be transparent all the time. The first draft of the Face of the Field essay will be due on May 8th, 2022. What that means is that we've got plenty of lead time before that due date, and I do recommend that you use it, even if you're only doing little bits at a time. Start your searching now. The key here is deciding who it is that you'll be focusing on, and that decision is going to take work even before you do any of the rest of the research that the paper will rely upon. To that end, I'd recommend entering your field of study, whatever it is, into Google. And rather than just looking at any old Google result, click on the News tab. This can be a very effective way to see what people are not only working in your field, but are also doing really prominent things that the general public cares about. Once you've done that, find your figure and see what you can find on them in the SUNY Erie databases or even in the library itself. Like I said before, it's possible that you'll find some good sources there. After that, try Wikipedia, but don't use it for the articles. There's really very little guarantee that the Wikipedia articles themselves are of good quality, but often they rely upon sources that are of good quality. And that's the way that you want to do that. Look up those Wikipedia articles and then look at the very bottom for the sources that they're referring to. Lastly, work on your effective web searching. And as I note here, we all know what that means. Work on your Googling. I've got a direct link here to 21 Google search tips that are very, very good. And the discussion of them is in quite a lot of depth, so it's clear how to use those. Now, modes of development for this essay are going to take us back to basics. They're going to be narrative, they're going to be description, and finally, the whole essay is going to work through example and support writing. So, from that perspective, really, the rhetorical modes that we're using here are the ones that we've probably relied upon for years and years and years, well before you ever took this course. Now, I put a pinpoint on narrative and description because these are the two modes that are the chief ones that we use to construct examples. The essay relies upon our assertion at the beginning of the person that we've chosen. After that, the examples that we use to show how it is that they are the current face of the field will be examples that we construct through narratives and examples that we construct through description. From another perspective, though, really every single thing we do in this essay is persuasion of some sort. We are persuading the reader that our profile figure is important. We're persuading the reader that our profile figure represents the field itself. We're persuading the reader of the importance of the field itself. We are persuading the reader that the profile figure's long term impact will be felt. Lastly, we are persuading the reader that you have done the research and you know what you're talking about. This last bit of persuasion is probably the most important of all. A reader who starts to doubt how much work you put into the writing is a reader that isn't going to be persuaded by any of the other things. Now, to mention some of the posted examples, what I'd like to do here is just set your expectations for what to find and for what aspect of these examples will be useful to look at versus those that might not be. I begin with the profile of Florence Nightingale. It's clearly written, it's easy to read, and it's formatted correctly, save for the references page, so don't look at that quite so closely. It's got good factual information about the medical field and Nightingale's actions in it, but little information about her personally, and so we're losing out on that important appeal of the paper. Really, clarity stands in for interest here. Clarity is what makes this easier to read, rather than interest in the personal aspects of Nightingale's life. Really, it's the sort of profile that you read once, but that you find has been written many times over, just because of how many other places in which you would find the same listing of facts that all have to do with Nightingale's life. Next, we have the profile of Bill Nye. This has been clearly written, it's easy to read and formatted correctly overall, so take a look at all the aspects of it for any formatting questions you might have. What I like a lot about this is that it's an unexpected choice in that it's profiling Nye not as a television personality, not as a scientist, but instead as an educator, which is really interesting. The inclusion of personal information about Nye helps the essay as a whole to come alive, and again, it makes it that much more fresh a take on effective teaching. Next, we have the profile of Newton and Musk. Now, the author of this was clearly working to capture as much of the history of the field as they could. And again, it's clearly written, it's easy to read, it's formatted correctly, there's plenty of factual information. There's very little personal information here. And again, I think it's because of the fact that the essay has bitten off far more than it can chew. But the main thing that I found when I first read this and find again and again when I go back to it is that the field itself has existed for so long and changed so much that it's really unclear how Musk could ever be the face of the same field Newton helped to start. Right. And so it's kind of a stretch seeing the two of these figures as somehow prominent in the same field of study that way. Next, we have the profile called the Pioneers of Calculus. Uh, Same things as the rest. It's clearly written, easy to read, formatted correctly, lots of personal and professional information about figures, which is great. Actually, this profile does work really well in its ability to put together personal details about the figures and the sorts of details about their professional studies that would help a reader to understand those studies and the way that they eventually develop the calculus. Uh, it's also well researched. Certainly, this is convincing in that way. You read it, and at least for me, I was immediately impressed by the amount of research that went into it. It might be too much of a good thing, though. This piece is just so long in so much detail that it runs the risk of not being effective just by virtue of the fact that it's hard to navigate. There's a lot to read there, and it's very easy to get lost given how much there is, how dense it is, and how long it is. From the opposite perspective, I've also included two professionally written profiles. And these are ones that I've taught for a long time, and I keep going back to them because of just how good they are. The first one is thoroughly heartwarming. It's quirky, it's human, it's very warm. It's in a style that is immediately engaging. It's called Mr. Hunter's Grave. Um, it reminds me of a warm cup of tea on a winter's day. It really has that sort of effect on one's soul. And these are not words that you hear me use often. So please take that as an indication of just how good this thing is. There is also the profile called Trump Solo, and you can guess based on the title of the profile who that has to do with. It's enjoyable, but it's enjoyable in all of the ways that are different from Mr. Hunter's Grave. Um, if we know anything of the personality of our former president, um, it is not necessarily warm and inviting, but it's still really interesting to see the way that it plays out. Sort of the same way that it was impossible to look away from the 4 years from 2016 to 2020. And it's written in a manner that is designed to help the reader pull out all of those most important traits that Trump has. I recommend taking the time to read them both. Honestly, they're both enjoyable. They're worth reading just as generally good pieces of writing. But specifically, take from these what it means to write in an engaging way about who someone is, and then to marry that with the most factual and clearest details having to do with what that person does. Right? So again, we're looking at the face of the field piece as being about the most prominent figure in your field right now, but we're using the personal aspect of the essay as a way of drawing your reader in and also being able to tell that reader about the field itself and what's going on within it.